So there are three factors driving the market. And the first one is that there is increased regional tensions, and that's coming out of the Middle East and Asia Pacific. The second factor that's driving this is the market is being driven by the growth in military aerospace requirements. And now these are very difficult to domestically build, and they cost huge amounts to research and develop. So what's happening is that countries are choosing to import military aerospace capability rather than build it themselves. And the third reason is due to the relative growth in GDP around the world. So what's happening is countries like India, China, Saudi Arabia are seeing relative increases in their GDP and have more money to spend on defense. The market in terms of exporters continues to be dominated by the United States with $23 billion worth of exports, and Russia with about $10 billion of exports. The United States exports are set to continue to grow, whilst Russia is now expected to maybe fall in coming years. And this is primarily due to the end of some large contracts in helicopters and vehicles. In terms of how the total chart changed, what we're seeing is that South Korea and Spain both did very well in terms of growth over the last year. And that's primarily due to Airbus production facilities in Spain with the A400M and C295, both transport aircraft, whilst in South Korea, some of the sales they made previously to Indonesia for fighter jets are now starting to get delivered to Indonesia, which has pushed them very far up the chart in the last year. In terms of companies, the market continues to be dominated by Boeing and Lockheed Martin, again because they are large aerospace exporters, whilst when we look at vehicles, General Dynamics now control a very large part of the market for vehicles, and this will be cemented in future years as their very large LAV-3 armoured vehicle program export to Saudi Arabia begins deliveries. It could be that they start to control maybe up to a quarter of the market going forwards. Whilst in ships and helicopters, in ships, Russia with the United Shipbuilding Corporation dominates the market, primarily with exports to Vietnam and India. And in helicopters, the Russian MIL helicopter company has taken the lead for the first time, as its primary export of transport helicopters are exported to China, India, and other countries around the world. Well, Saudi Arabia retook its #1 position as the largest importer in the world, displacing India. And the reason for this was that Saudi Arabia has now got two large fighter programs simultaneously running, F-15s and Eurofighters, whilst the large programs for India, from America, Apaches and P-8s, are starting to slow down slightly. That's what changed at the very top end of the market. But looking further down, we're seeing that the growth came from Asia Pacific, and it came from South Korea, which is starting to ramp up deliveries, Australia, which is taking advantage of the commodities boom to import more, and Indonesia, which has seen a very large growth in its population and thus its GDP, is having to import more because it still doesn't have a developed industrial base. Saudi Arabia, we forecast to have the most unawarded contracts going forwards over the next decade. And this is primarily due to their very large naval requirements for corvettes, frigates, destroyers, and maybe even submarines. India has a much larger overall requirement and for defense spending, but we think they'll import far less equipment, maybe only a third of their total requirements. But this really depends on how fast they reform their bureaucracy and their procurement policy. In terms of future opportunities for emerging countries, we believe that Qatar for fighter aircraft and for ships will be a very fast-growing and very large import market over the next 10 years. Poland for air defense and helicopters. Brazil for its very large naval program, elements of which have yet to be awarded. And then back to the Middle East with Kuwait, where they have not imported for a large period of time, and they now have a series of requirements for naval frigates and for multi-role aircraft. Well, the backlog is very strong. We expect to see growth continuing in the short term, but we expect that future opportunities will continue to be driven very fast. And this will be driven fast because we believe that the world economy will keep growing in the developing world. We believe that a lot of those developing countries still don't have the military industrial base to develop their own systems and will have to continue to import. And finally, we think that regional tensions, particularly in the Middle East and in Asia Pacific, will continue to increase.